we come back from break, we're going to do something similar that we did the second class period. I've got another DVD of an episode where I'm going to show a clip of a movie, and you're going to apply what we talk about in lecture as you watch that DVD clip in the second half of class. So we'll make application of the concepts to a dramatization. And that's how we'll conduct class today. So let us jump right in to the lecture and talk about this concept of human suffering and healthcare. So we're looking at this, the idea of human suffering through the lens of our major world religions and some other religious belief systems. The first slide I'm going to give you is some preparatory statements. This is not in your notes. So I'll alert you whenever we get to that place. Well, why is this an important lecture? Why do we care about human suffering? Why is this something that you as future nurses need to be aware of? The first reason is because most of us, our patients and us, really don't think about the problem of evil when we get up in the morning. When you got up and got ready for class today, you probably weren't thinking, there's probably going to be evil and wickedness occur in the world around me today. I wonder why that is so. You probably didn't think that way, because we don't think that way. But for the individuals today who had a traumatic experience, an accident occurred, a death occurred unexpectedly, they lost a job, anything where loss and suffering and grief is associated, they're thinking about, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? Why did it happen to me now? Because the fact of the matter is that we all want to understand that why question. We want to make sense out of our environments. We want to understand why bad things happen to good people. When that kind of stuff happens, we can't wrap our head around it. If we can't make sense out of it, we really wrestle and struggle with it. And eventually, as healthcare providers, this issue will weigh on your soul and your spirits if you do not learn how to, at the beginning, manage the weight of the issue of human pain and suffering. Because the reality is, every day when you go to work, you're going to be dealing with people who are at their worst. For the most part, you're not going to have a lot of happy people every day. You're going to be dealing with people who are uncomfortable, who are in pain, who are tired, who hurt, who are grumpy, who are frustrated, who are depressed. So the people that you deal with on a regular basis are not going to be at their best. Yes, ma'am.
Is this the four rationale?
No, it is not.
Okay.
I'll alert you here in this moment.
Okay.
So because of that, you've got to figure out how to handle that weight that is a natural and inherent part of the jobs and the ministries that we do in healthcare. So let me make a parenthetical statement. Let me step aside from the lecture for just a moment and give you a word of encouragement. You're at the very front end of your healthcare careers. In another year, year and a half, you're going to be at the very front end. You're at the front end of your educational careers. In another year, year and a half, you're going to be at the front end of your healthcare careers. This is the best time for you to figure out and draw some good and healthy boundaries for yourself now. Because healthcare is 24/7. The needs never stop. As a nurse, you'll never find a place where, okay, I'm done with this patient, they're over and it's all good. You'll just hand them off to the next person. Because the needs never stop and we're ongoing all the time. So there's no sense of closure and the needs are always there, and when you come back, you're right back in the middle of it. And sometimes it's even a lot more chaotic than when you left. So at this point in your lives and your careers, I want you to strongly consider figuring out what are appropriate boundaries for yourself. You need to learn how to care for yourself as a healthcare provider, because nobody else will. There's nobody else who's going to look after you and make sure that you've got good emotional, spiritual care going on in your life. Evidence of that comes from in-services that are available all the time in healthcare for nurses in particular who've got to do those continuing education units. You'll always find topics on, there are two topics you'll always see offered. That is burnout and compassion fatigue. And that's because of this issue of dealing with human suffering. If we don't learn to draw good boundaries for ourselves, we're going to wear out emotionally and spiritually. So you need to look out for yourselves. You need to care for yourselves so that you don't suffer burnout. And you're not one of those grumpy, frustrated old nurses who's just doing it because it's a job. And you're not one of those people who doesn't have another ounce of energy to give because you've given it to everybody else. You can't even give it to your own family because you cared for everybody else so much. So strongly take that into consideration, because that's the reality in healthcare. Okay, there's my little encouragement to you. We'll now move to the first section of the first item on your notes there. So with that as a backdrop, here are some statements in regards to the combination of these two topics, suffering and our human thinking. The first is this. As humans, we have a need to order our world. As human beings, we all have this inherent need to order the world around us, to make sure that things are in place and that we know where that place is. We want everything around us to be in some sense of order, and therefore make sense to us. That's our second statement. Not only do we have the need to order our world, we also want to make sense out of our environment. So when we put things in order, that helps it make sense to us. You have all done that in this classroom. You found the spot that you like to sit in. Typically you sit in that same area, if not that same chair. And you have all of your things around you, your nest. Your drinks that you need, the pens, books, whatever, you've got all that set up. And so this little area that you're in for the next 2 hours makes sense to you now. And every time we move to a new place, we do that same kind of thing. We try to put things in order in the world around us so it makes sense and helps us have some idea of perceived control over our environment. These are basic propositions, I guess you could say. We all have the need to order the world around us. We want, therefore, our environment to make sense to us, if to no one else, and we want to feel some sense of control over the environment around us. There's a topic with that a lot of research has been done in the area of happiness. So for about 50 years, researchers have been trying to figure out what is it that makes individuals happy. And one of the things that they've discovered in the research is that it's not how much money you make. The level of money, or the amount of money that an individual makes, does not always equate to happiness, because some of the poorest people around the world report as high, if not higher, levels of happiness than some of the most wealthy people. So money is not the issue that makes us happy. Here's one of the things that is, and it shows up in almost every version of the research. So that there's not a complete consensus on what the things are that make people happy. But this one issue shows up pretty regular in the different areas of research. And that is perceived control. If you feel like you've got control over your environment, over the things that happen to you, your perception is that you've got control, that adds to your level of happiness. You feel more satisfied when you perceive that you've got control over things. So this is true for us, and this is true for our patients. Keep that in mind as well. Because lastly, these statements lead us to the idea that understanding our purpose gives us a future goal or a sense of hope, which harkens us back and takes us almost full circle to the first part of our course together when we talked about universal spiritual needs and the need that we all have to have a meaningful life and to have purposeful activity in our lives. We all have the need for meaning and purpose, and that gives us a sense of hope for the future. So think about this for yourselves, but also for your future patients. Your patients want to have feel like things are in order in their room as well. And when they get into a hospital room, they're going to kind of set up house. They're going to try to make sense out of all the unusual equipment and stuff in their rooms. And they're going to want some sense of control over it to make them feel that safety and security. Because that's what will give them some hope as they move through a very difficult time in their lives. So these propositions help us understand why this issue of human suffering impacts us in healthcare. And all of it stems from a philosophical concept known as the problem of evil. So human suffering, philosophically, is tied to the problem of evil. And why does evil exist? What is evil? Well, let's look at some definitions from some of the major world religions and actually start with our classical spiritual traditions. So if you'll remember from a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the classical spiritual tradition of monism. And that was the idea that everything is of one singular substance. We're all a part of one unit. There's no sense of individuality. From that perspective, any religion that falls under the monistic tradition, they will define evil as a theistic problem. Meaning, if evil exists in the world, it's because of the way you define God. If you define God as all-loving and all-compassionate and kind, then it's hard to understand why bad things happen to good people if God is a loving, compassionate God. So the reason that evil exists is because of the way you define God. The classical spiritual tradition of dualism, if you'll remember, this was when there's two competing gods or two competing forces wrapped in an eternal struggle with each other. Dualistic religions, such as Taoism, define evil as the absence of good. Evil exists when good is absent. If you'll remember, we talked about that symbol of the Tao, that oval-shaped symbol with a squiggly line in the middle, half of it's white, half of it's black. The whole idea is to try to find balance. But when you're in the black part of that image, that's where evil reigns, and there is no good. So dualistic religions would say evil exists when good men and women do nothing. And then the last classical spiritual tradition I want to look at is classical monotheism. So this covers our three major world religions: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And classical monotheism defines evil using a term called privation. So Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all share this concept in common, that evil exists because of a term that they use called privation, which means evil is the result of a corrupt and fallen world. All three of those major world religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, believe that man was created in a pristine, perfect condition, but fell from the grace of God, the grace and the presence of God. And once they fell and sin entered the world became corrupt and evil. That concept is known as privation. So we have those three major world religions, and there are others that also have that perspective. So this leads us to asking a couple of questions. What do we do with suffering? How do we define what suffering is? Is it a constant? Is suffering the same for every person? Well, here is one definition for suffering. It comes from authors Jones and Kendall in a book called Lady in Waiting. And they define suffering. Yes, sir?
Is this in the notes?
I don't think so. What is the next? Nope, hadn't got to the two types yet. Jones and Kendall describe or define suffering as having what you don't want and wanting what you don't have. That's one definition of what suffering is. People suffer when they have what they don't want. I've got cancer. I don't want cancer. So I'm suffering because I've got the evil of cancer in my body. Or wanting what we don't have. I want a relationship with this person. This person doesn't want a relationship with me. There's emotional suffering that's connected to that. So that's one way of defining, probably a pretty simplistic way of defining what suffering is. But it helps us understand a little bit. It also causes us to ask questions about what role do natural forces play in human suffering? And what role do human actions play in human suffering, or in the concept of suffering? So suffering exists. There's some natural occurrences that cause it. There's human actions that cause it. How do we make sense out of all those things? Dr. Scott Peck was a psychiatrist and a Christian author, and he wrote several books. He had a psychiatric practice for many, many years, and one of the books he wrote was called People of the Lie, The Hope for Healing Human Suffering, Human Evil. And the premise of his book was that all individuals are capable of evil. Because he defines evil in this way. It's up there on the screen. Evil, in his understanding, is the use of power, political or otherwise, to destroy others for the purpose of defending one's own sick self. So he took this definition of evil and applied it across the board, and using his own anecdotal psychiatric practice, tried to understand and define what evil is and how it exists in the world. So this idea of evil being the use of power to destroy others in order to preserve our own selves, he says, is applicable to all of us. Because at some level, we all have power over others. Give me some examples from your own life right now where you have power over other people. If you're a parent and you've got children, you get to tell those kids where to go, when to go, what to do, how to do it. You've got control and power over your kids. Therefore, the potential exists for you to use that power in ways that preserve yourself and damage your children. What are some other relationships where you have power? Okay, an employment situation. I can hear that up here.
No, in the t-shirt.
Oh, okay. Thank you. If you're a boss and you've got people who are underneath you that you supervise, same situation, you've got power over them. Any other examples you can think of?
You have some control over your patient.
Okay. You have power over your patients because you've got a lot of control over what happens to them and when it happens and how it happens. And for some of you, you're the kind of people that have what they call referent power. And that's the power that you have because you're just a charismatic individual. People flock to you. You're the center of your social circle. People want to be around you. If you're in a group your group will do whatever you suggest that you do. They'll go eat wherever you want to go eat because you have that kind of influence and that effect on others. So we all have power, one way or another, over other people. And Dr. Peck says that when we use that for our own benefit, to the detriment of others, that is evil. So to illustrate that, he shares a story in this book, People of the Lie, about a family. It was a mom and a dad and a 14-year-old son. Now this is back in the mid-1970s, so this has been a few years ago. And at this time, the son was a had become a disruptive student in his school. So they referred the son and his parents to counseling with Dr. Peck, the school did. And when Dr. Peck first met with him, he did what we've talked about. He did a spiritual assessment and tried to find out where the family was and find out information about the family. So in the course of a couple of 2 or 3 visits, he discovers that there was another son. But the older son had killed himself about a year and a half previous. And so Dr. Peck makes the connection pretty quickly. The younger son is reacting, this is part of his grief, to the death of his older son and what's going on in his family's dynamic as a result of that. So they rock along and continue their visits, and another thing that surfaces pretty soon is that the parents eventually admit that their older son was really their favorite son. They really loved the older boy more than they did the younger one. And so they were completely consumed in their own grief over the loss of their favorite child. And the younger son was reacting to his parents' neglect, emotional neglect, and their the way they interacted with him. So Christmas time rolls around, and they take a little break, and when the family comes back in January, the boy has become even more disruptive. He's non-compliant at school. His grades have gone from A's and B's down to C's and D's. Now he's failing. And there was a really huge change in his behavior whenever he came back after the Christmas holidays. So Dr. Peck is exploring with the family what happened. How did something occur? Was there a precipitating event? And the parents kind of sheepishly look at each other and say, well, we're not sure if this is related or not, but, well, you know, the Christmas holidays we just had, and our hearts just weren't in it. We were just grieving the loss of our other son, and we really don't have much money, and so we didn't know what to do, and we didn't really have enough money to buy our son a gift, but we felt like that we needed to buy him something for Christmas, but our hearts just weren't in it, and so we talked about it, and what we decided and what we did was we gave our younger son, as a Christmas gift, the shotgun his brother used to kill himself. And you're having a very normal reaction. It's like, how can reasonable people not connect those dots? To realize you give a gift like that, and what does that communicate? We wish you were dead too. That's what the younger son hears, and that is in part why he's acting out the way he is. But Dr. Peck's point in sharing that illustration is to say that those parents were evil. They were acting in evil ways towards their younger son because they had emotional power over him, and they were using that to preserve themselves. And he was trying to say that otherwise normal, rational, reasonable people can act in evil ways whenever we use our power for our own purposes at the expense of others. He also equates the concept of evil with the psychiatric diagnosis of narcissism. Anybody know what narcissism is? That's a good way to say it. When you are totally consumed with yourself, and you are in love with yourself, or you are just absolutely absorbed with your wants, your needs, your wishes, your intellect, your appearance. You think think you're the greatest, the most beautiful, the most handsome, the smartest. You're just completely consumed with yourself, that the world revolves around you. And there is a psychological disorder in the DSM-5 or 6, whichever edition we're on, for narcissism. So that is a psychiatric diagnosis for some patients. Dr. Peck says that people who are identified as narcissistic, you need to watch out for them because they have a strong propensity towards evil. Anybody know where we got that term narcissism? Yeah, what's the story? Anybody remember? Well, there is a flower that's, yes.
In, pond?
Uh-huh.
That's all I remember.
Okay. So there was the Greek god named Narcissus, and there's also a flower named after this god. But one day he was strolling through the forest and came upon a pond and saw his reflection in the water and thought to himself, how handsome I am. And just became enamored with his own beauty to the point where that's all he did all day was look at himself in the reflection of the pond. So the other gods cursed him with that. So that's what he was cursed to do for the rest of his existence, was just to stare at himself. He wasn't any good to anybody else. So that's what he did every day, was just stare at his reflection in the pool of water. One day, as the myth goes, he got a little too close to the water and slipped in, fell in the water, and drowned. So his ultimate demise was his absorption with himself. And that's where we get the term narcissism, to be completely and totally absorbed by yourself. Okay. That, I hope, helps us define a little bit about what evil is, or how we can define what evil is, and understand that evil is something that we're all capable of. So now let's talk about two types of evil. The first is natural evil. We've got two categories of evil. Since we know suffering exists and it's tied to this problem of evil, suffering then is a result of natural evil, and we'll talk about the other in a second. Natural evil is any evil and suffering that's caused by natural forces. So give me some examples of what natural evil is. Tornadoes. Hurricane Matthew, yes. And as a result, what's happening now in North Carolina? Anybody hear about it this morning? Floods. So that's another natural evil, because the report I heard said there's all kinds of debris and animal carcasses and all kinds of stuff. So people are losing livestock and possessions and their own life because of flooding. So we got tornadoes. I think I heard somebody say hurricanes, floods. What are other natural evils? Did I hear wildfire? Okay. Anything that we as humans can't control falls under this category. Anything that we can't control that can cause suffering on to us as humans. So the second category is moral evil. And we'll define moral evil as any evil directly caused by human action. Natural evil is what happens that we can't control. It's just like the force of nature. Moral evil is what humans cause. It's action directly caused by a human. So what are some examples of moral evil? Okay, smoking, I hear. We're going to come back to that in just a second. That's kind of because the icon on the screen gives you that thought. Yes, ma'am.
Like when big companies like CVS take all the pensions and companies go bankrupt.
Okay, a misuse of funds. You're in a position of power and you misuse funds. That's moral evil. The Holocaust, moral evil. What else? Abuse of any kind. Sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. any kind of abuse, moral evil. And what else can you think of? Yes, theft, terrorism, murder, war, genocides. I've heard that a report, there's war going on in Syria right now, and innocent children are being slaughtered as a result of the fights, the terrorism and the fighting that's going on over there. That's a moral evil. So we can see that evil, when it occurs, there's two categories. We can define it further by saying either that's something that happens naturally and as a result of something we can't control, or it's because human beings have acted in evil ways. So what do we do? How do we address this issue of suffering and the problem of evil based on these definitions? Let's look at how some of our major world religions and some other belief systems address the issue of the problem of evil. So Hinduism, one of our major world religions, their approach to the problem of evil and suffering is that is reconciled through their belief in karma and reincarnation. The way Hinduism deals with the problem of evil and the fact that suffering exists is in their belief of karma and reincarnation. So Hindus teach that if you live a good life in your next life, then you will receive rewards. You'll be elevated to a higher level of existence. And if you live a bad life, you're going to come back in a lower life form. So there's multiple lives that we're living, and karma dictates where we end up. Buddhism, one of our other 5 major world religions. Buddhists teach that evil and suffering are reconciled by following the Eightfold Path. You'll remember when we talked about that last week. Buddhists have the 4 Noble Truths. The first one is all of life is suffering. Suffering is caused by our human desires, but suffering can be overcome if you will follow the Eightfold Path. So Buddhists teach, yes, all of life is suffering, but there is a way out of it if you follow the Eightfold Path. Islam. Muslims explain evil as being the exception to life, whereas goodness is the rule. So let me read to you from a gentleman named Abu Muhammad Samir Fayyid. He's from allexperts.com. And he says that there is more good in creation than, there's more good in creation. There are more healthy people than there are sick. There are more people who eat well than starve. There's more people who live decent lives than who commit crimes. Therefore, goodness is the rule, and evil is the exception. Virtue is the norm, and sin is the aberration. So Islam teaches goodness is really what rules. When evil exists, it is the exception. And ultimately, evil will be punished. You will suffer the consequences of your evil actions eventually. All right, let's look at some classical spiritual traditions for a moment. Animism. That tradition that believes that souls and spirits reside in objects. Not only do individuals have a soul or a spirit, but objects, physical things, have a soul or a spirit. And they deal with this issue of evil and suffering by saying that it exists as a result of sin. However, sin is defined for them, so depending on what the religion is, how they define what sin is, evil and suffering are a result of the fact that people have sinned. There's a group that we've not mentioned in class yet, and it's referred to as the New Age movement, or just New Age belief. New Ageism came about in the late 70s and early 80s. And it is a a conglomeration of Eastern religion and philosophy and conservative, conventional Western Christianity. So what happened as a result of the social revolution of the 1960s, our men and women were going overseas and fighting and were being exposed to some new ways of thinking. Whenever they came back from the eastern part of the world, Vietnam, Korea, Laos, all that area, and they were exposed to those Eastern philosophies and religions, when they came back, they found that there were some practices that were helpful, that they liked, that were good. And so they tried to blend and incorporate those into their conservative Christian beliefs. And as a result, what happened was this new mixture in this conglomeration where there were people, or there was the idea that we can take the best of both belief systems. The best of Christianity, the best of Eastern philosophy, merge them, and we have a new age of belief. In this new age, the thought is that our human minds are what create our reality. Reality only exists as we create it in our minds. Therefore, evil and suffering are simply an illusion created by our mind. New Age beliefs will teach, if you are suffering, if you are experiencing evil, it is because your mind has created that reality and allows that to exist. So you have to work through the power of your mind to overcome and to recreate or reframe, would be the psychological term, what your experience is, and to recreate it. And then a third belief system that you might be familiar with that we haven't talked about yet is secular humanism. Secular humanism is also came out of that same time period, and it really is what is dominating our landscape, our political and governmental landscape right now. Secular humanists emphasize the power of the individual to overcome his or her circumstances or environment. I want to read to you the statement that explains their position on